Well, hello everybody. You can hear me all right? Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank FREEOK for the invitation to speak to you, and at the same time wish a festering pox on them for putting me after Sean Faircloth. Terrible people. Okay, usually when I talk about secular parenting, my talks range over a large number of topics. I talk about dealing with death and community and moral development and religious literacy and all these various things, look at research and statistics and so on. Today I've chosen to focus on one thing only, one question, the question that I've come to think of as the central question, the most important question in secular parenting. And it is a question I first encountered in 1999 when my son Connor, who is right there, these are my kids. My son Connor was 4, and he looked like this. He doesn't know I use this picture. But he was going to a Lutheran preschool at the time. My wife was Christian at the time. She's recovering now. And it was a good program in our area, really a good kind of low-key, brimstone-free introduction to Judeo-Christian ideas in addition to this really good academic program, good social program. I was fine with it. But I wondered for a while if it was going to be an issue at any point. And for a long time it really wasn't. It was just fine. And then when he was 4 years old, been in the program for a couple of years, and one day he was walking up the stairs in our house, and I was behind him on the stairs, and I just said offhandedly, Connor, why are you growing so big? Just a little thing, and he did, without missing a beat, he turned around and said, I don't know, Dad, I guess God just wants me to grow. And it's heartwarming, but I froze for a second. I didn't know exactly what to say. I had thought about all sorts of parenting things, including a lot of religious things, you know, the way we were handling the balance and all this, but I hadn't really thought about how I would address it when my child made what was essentially a statement of faith to me, you know, when it was that direct. And some people would say that the answer is obvious. You know, you just say to the child, you know, funny thing, it turns out God is not real, but your dad is real, and I'm standing behind you, and I'm 6'1", and maybe that's why you're so tall. But I had an intuition that that was not what I wanted to say. That was not the ideal way to approach this. And some people would say, why not? You know, why not just own it? Tell them this. Actually, when I wrote Parenting Beyond Belief is the work of 27 contributors. And one of the contributors in that, I tried to bring together a wide range of viewpoints, including some things that I didn't fully agree with, other approaches to secular parenting. And one of the contributors said, tell your kids there's no God and be done with it, right? And that's fine. A lot of people make that work. I had an intuition that that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to approach it in a different way. And some people will say, why? Do you think that other worldviews are as legitimate as you? Do you think that all the options are the same? No, I certainly don't. I think my worldview is better than other worldviews. It happens to be true. That's only the beginning of it. But I also think that it is stronger. I think it's more ennobling. I think it is more humane. There are all sorts of reasons to prefer it. There's also the question of confidence in my worldview. Some people will say, what, are you not confident enough in your worldview to present it to your child as fact? And quite the opposite is true. I am frighteningly confident in my worldview. I am extraordinarily grounded in it. I am confident to the point where when I get into a conversation or a debate with a religious friend, I'm very relaxed about it, even if they're not, right? I mean, they will sometimes get very flustered and defensive, and I don't anymore. That's how confident and grounded I am in it. It changes the way I see everything in the world, the fact that I have come to that conclusion. And it's put the whole universe in an entirely different perspective. This is not a small thing for me. the confidence that I have in it and what that confidence means to me. So no, as I stood there on the stairs with my son, it had nothing to do with diminished confidence in my worldview. Something else was going on. What I was struggling with was the question of whether I was raising atheists or raising freethinkers. And I mean that with a lowercase f, by the way. Freethinkers is a very interesting word, freethinker. It's the only word I know that when you capitalize it becomes its opposite, right? So lowercase f, I'm all in favor of the idea of exploring ideas openly and applying reason and rational thinking and critical thinking and so on. But you capitalize that f and it can become dogmatic in its own way. Here's what you have to believe in order to be a freethinker. It's a very ironic statement, but I've had people essentially say that. The other aspect of this that was very important, the reason I began to tend toward the idea that I was raising freethinkers, not specifically raising atheists, is the way I was raised. My parents accidentally raised me as a freethinker, I think, is really the best way to put it. We went to church every Sunday, but it was never forced on us. We were never asked to declare something that we believed or that we were. I honestly think they were too exhausted to indoctrinate us with anything, but that's fine. It worked out well. So we had exposure to these ideas, but they also instilled something in us that was absolutely critical and I think is the most important thing, and that is a ravenous curiosity about the world. My parents made me think that there was nothing cooler than finding out about the world, than finding out what's behind the veil of our own ignorance, right? And that they went after like mad. That's what they put their energy into. Now, if you have a child who has that hunger to see the world as it really is, you can let them go. You can let them play. Give them the tools to interrogate that world. But as long as they've got that curiosity, they actually won't stand for anything that stands in the way of understanding the world. So, but I hadn't sorted all these things out yet. This is something that I did over the course of the years between this conversation on the stairs and Parenting Beyond Belief, which came out 8 years later. So for the time being, I said essentially nothing. I think I said something like, and then continued on the stairs. But I had 2 more kids, so I had an opportunity to do a little better. And by the time his youngest sister, Delaney, was in the same preschool, and she was 4, I had a plan. I had an approach. I knew what I was doing in terms of this question, how I was raising freethinkers. And one day, Delaney came to me and said that she had finally figured out, as she put it, the whole God and Jesus thing when she was 4. She had heard about these guys at school, but they had never explained the division of labor. That's the thing that was bothering her. You know, what does God do? What does Jesus do? So she made up her own theology. And she decided that Jesus made all the nice things in the world and God made all the bad and scary things in the world. So puppies and PBS are from Jesus and tornadoes and Fox News are from God. And here's the moment again. She just gave me essentially a statement of belief. She gave me a theology. What do I do? And what I said was, cool, I never thought of it like that, right? And then I said, keep thinking about this, and the next idea you get, I want to hear that one too. Now what that did, first of all, I told her it was cool to be asking these questions, because it is, right? These are the greatest questions you can ask, all this stuff. I never understood people who didn't find it interesting. That's the thing that always, you know, is there a God or is there not? It doesn't get more interesting than that. I said I never thought of it like that, you know, which was true. And then I planted a seed that she wasn't done, right? Keep thinking about this. Tell me what your next idea is. That gives them the idea that the inquiry goes on, you know? I didn't say, no, you're wrong, keep working on it. I said, cool, keep working on it. That's a different approach. So sure enough, about a week later, she promulgated a revised encyclical. And she said, I actually think God is for grown-ups and Jesus is for kids, is what she decided. And she said, my favorite example of this, God made all the things for grown-ups and Jesus made all the things for kids. And she said, God made the deep end of the pool, right? And Jesus made the shallow end for her. And I thought that was fabulous. And so I gave her a big hug and I said, so God for me and Jesus for you, eh? And she said, I guess so, but I'm still thinking about it. Which is perfect. I mean, that's the phrase that I wanted my kids to say over and over again, and that they ended up just saying like a mantra. They'd say, here's what I think, and I'm still thinking, but I'm still in process. So this is very similar to what I had growing up. I began to realize that I was actually raising my kids in a very similar way to what I had. They know what I believed. They always knew what I believed. But I would always follow up my own statements of what I thought was true by saying, this is something that people have to figure out for themselves. You should talk to people who believe different things. Go talk down the street, talk to Grandma Barbara. I know that she thinks that Jesus did rise from the dead or whatever it is. And then you get to make up your own mind. That's the message my kids got over and over again. And I said, and you can change your mind 1,000 times if you want. Change it as often as you want. Kids never get that message. It's the simplest message in the world. And that's one that people don't hear. Not only do you get to make up your own mind, but then you don't have to set your feet in cement. You know, change again and change again as you keep getting new ideas and new evidence. The result of this kind of worldview experiment is, instead of handing my kids a finished package of atheism, right? Hey, guess what? Good news, you don't have to do all the work on this. I gave you a worldview. Here it is. Thanks, Dad. You know, then the result is they're standing on a foundation that they didn't construct themselves. And everybody knows how this is, right? If somebody tells you something, that's one level of engagement and one level of understanding. But if you come to it yourself through your own process, it's much deeper. It's much more profound. That's what I want my kids to have. My worldview is the way it is. I'm confident in the way I am, because I placed every brick in the foundation I'm standing on. Nobody taught me atheism. Nobody handed me atheism, right? I went out after the world and said, I'm going to try to figure this thing out. And I looked at religion and I looked at science and I went all through this, like most of the people in here probably did. Most of you were probably not handed atheism. As a result, you probably share with me this tremendous confidence, right? This peace of being on a foundation of your own construction. If I hand it to my kids as a finished thing, it's all full of holes. They don't know what the bricks are, right? And that means the wind is going to come along of somebody who, you know, says Jesus this and Jesus that, and it can knock them right off of that foundation. They're much less sound. I want my kids to have a sound foundation for it, not just the answer itself. Okay. Now, and I'll talk about Aaron in just a minute, my middle child. Yeah, you okay? I want to just put up on the screen for a second the other way of approaching this. Another way, and this is not a fringe way. It's a lunatic way, but it's not a fringe way. It's something that has sold millions of books. This woman is Joyce Meyer. Weirdly lived about 3 miles from my mother for many years in her complex. She has a lot of complexes. But in this book, Battlefield of the Mind for Teens, she talks about, sold over 1 million copies, this one book. And she talks about how to help kids not think for themselves. Here's a passage. Satan will look for your child's weakest area and attack at that point. He will attempt to fill your child with worry, reasoning, fear, depression, and discouraging negative thoughts. And I saw that, and I went, you know, did she really put reasoning in the devil's toolkit? So I thought I'm missing context or something. I kept reading. And she says, I once asked the Lord why so many people are confused, and he said to me, that first of all, tell them to stop trying to figure everything out, and they will stop being confused. I have found it to be absolutely true. Reasoning and confusion go together. It's true, right? Now this is to the kids. This she's addressing directly to teenagers. Now this one makes me ill. Ask yourself continually, what would Jesus think? Remember, if he wouldn't think about something, you shouldn't either. By keeping continual watch over your thoughts, you can ensure that no damaging enemy thoughts creep into your mind. This is the sickest thing you can say to a teenager right at the point they're supposed to be evaluating the world and thinking of contrary things, is that they can't even let the thought enter their mind in the first. How are they going to think about it if it can't enter their mind, right? How can they even make a judgment? It's just completely crazy making. Joyce Meyer. Okay. So one of the areas that, kind of a seemingly unexpected area when you're talking about free thought, yeah, in case you can't read that up there. Dear children, one day you will learn everything about Santa Claus. On that day, remember everything the adults have told you about Jesus. This is one of the things I wrote about in Parenting Beyond Belief. Tom Flynn and I actually did a point-counterpoint on the Santa question. And Tom is very anti-Santy, which is fine. But I actually have a different take on it. And it relates to this whole question of whether you're of raising freethinkers. I see the Santa myth as an amazing opportunity for critical thinking. I call it the ultimate dry run. We have in our culture a silly temporary myth set up next to the silly permanent myth in our culture. Everyone is expected to get over this one eventually, right? That's the understanding. We started doing this because we did Santa ourselves as kids, our families did, and this sort of thing. So we sort of backed into it, stumbled in it. It wasn't, an intentional plan, but I began to think after a couple of years that there was something a little more powerful going on in doing that. And we did it with a very light touch in our family, but that there was something more powerful going on than I had given it credit for. And I realized that it gives kids an opportunity to be inside a cultural myth system and find their own way out. Now the key thing is you have to let them find their own way out. I think that the times you can really start to get kids feeling betrayed and horrified is when they are kept in their Santa belief beyond its normal course. But if you do it with a light touch, as we did, I think it can be an amazing exercise in critical thinking. So my kids would come to me, and if you have kids, you know how this works. They come to you at age 5 or whatever, and most of them will not look at you and say, "Is Santa real?" Right? Some will, but most of them don't do that. They ask an ancillary question. They ask a side question. They've come up with this thing that seems a little weird, and they wanted to ask you about it. So they say something like my son said, "How do the reindeer fly?" That seemed a little weird, right? And so I said what I started to use as my approach to this. I said, well, some people say, you start with that, some people say they eat magic corn. They eat magic corn. And this critical thinking, science-minded kid took that and went, okay, and he ran off and played. Why? Because he wanted to believe more than he wanted to know. He still had the will to believe that was much stronger than the will to know. And I was going to wait until his will to know was strong enough to ask me the question, right? So as a result, he kept sort of coming back and saying, how does Santa get all the way around the world in one night? These kinds of things. And I would say, well, some people say that it's not a literal night, something like that. Or that he works the time zones. I said, some people say that he goes against the spin of the earth or something like this, knowing that each one of these was only a partially satisfying answer to my son. And that he would go, okay, and run off, right? But eventually, age 8 is about the moment for an awful lot of kids. Eventually, I still remember it was December. We're in the Target parking lot in Crystal, Minnesota. Salvation Army bell ringer. And Connor looks at me and says, is Santa real? He was ready, okay? He was finally ready to ask the question himself. And I said, what do you think? And he said, I think it's the moms and dads. And this is the moment when you have to get it right. When you say, you did it. that's great. You figured that out. You looked at all the clues and you figured it out, and he just beams. He's so proud that he figured this out. And he said, oh, good. And I said, why good? And he said, well, the world makes sense again. There's all this stuff, you know. You got gravity, you got physics, you got all these things he's learning about in biology and photosynthesis and all these things that work. And then there's this magic man at the North Pole with the flying reindeer. And so he wasn't traumatized. What he had was this marvelous experience of unpacking a myth system himself. It was fun, we did it with a very light touch, and I think he benefited tremendously. And the same thing with my girls. Then the culture turns to him and says, okay, now there's this other magic man, right, who brings you gifts when you're good and punishes you when you're bad. And my child, I think, is going to have an extra experience in approaching that myth system, a really valuable one, and potentially finding their way out under their own power. And again, I think it's perfectly fine for somebody to do it or not, but I found it to be an unmissable opportunity for a kid. Okay. Here's Erin. This is when she was 9. She's 15 now. And when she was 9, this is the last example of this approach. She came to me and said, Daddy, I want to wear something to school tomorrow, but it makes me feel weird to wear it, and I don't know if I should. And it's just like Erin to open with a should question. That's her. The other kids are very into is, and she's into ought. That's her thing. Constantly dealing with moral ideas. And I said, well, what are you thinking of wearing? I thought it might be like, you know, spaghetti strap thing. They're like crazy about, in Georgia, about the straps on the shoulders have to be at least, you know, 3 fingers across or whatever the thing is. Arkansas, yeah, it's probably yeah. So anyway, it wasn't that. I said, what is it you want to wear? And she showed me this cross, pink beaded cross. And I knew when she had bought this. We were in Florida on vacation. We went into a dollar store, and there was this huge wall of crosses for $1. And I pictured in my mind this little sign that says, Jesus saves, why not you? But I said, why does it make you feel weird to wear it? You know, I didn't want to assume right from the beginning that I knew what she was feeling. I assumed it had to do with me, right? Her secular dad. She thought, oh, is this going to weird you out if I do this? But she said, I feel weird wearing it when I don't really believe in God, like I'm not being honest. But I just like to wear it. Now, this was the interesting thing. A lot of people would wear a cross in order to be thought to believe in God, right? But that's exactly what was bothering her. She didn't, and she didn't want to give the impression that she did. She didn't want to be dishonest. So I said, sweetie, it's a pretty necklace. I think it's fine for you to wear it. But she paused, and I could tell that there was something else that she hadn't said. She said, well, it also makes me feel good to wear it. And I thought, oh, there's at least one bad way to interpret that. And I said, you mean it makes you feel like a good person to wear a cross? And she said, no. She smiled kind of sheepishly, and she said, it just makes me feel good when I rub it. And I had been ready for that sentence for years. But the context was all wrong. So it was a talisman. It was a thing when she would take a quiz in school or something like that. She would just rub it, you know. Like I had a worry stone when I was in middle school. It was the same kind of thing. That's the way she was using it, and she didn't want her little talisman to be misinterpreted by others. So it was really a kind of thoughtful thing. Now, I could have found reasons to disallow this, right? I could have said, you know what? I really think it's a bad idea to wear this, and people will think something that's not true and all that. But I actually don't go looking for reasons to disallow things. I look for reasons to allow them, to give them the experience of actually feeling what it's like. She felt that it might feel weird to wear it. How's she going to know if it feels weird if I don't allow her to have that experience? So she wore it to school for a week, got to the end of the week, and she said, I'm not going to wear it anymore. It just makes me feel too weird. She owned that. There's a brick in her foundation. There's something she was standing on that was solid. And if I, at the beginning of the week, had forbidden her to wear it or something, said I don't think it's a good idea, she wouldn't have worn it, and she wouldn't have earned anything in terms of experience and knowledge. That's the difference in the approach. Okay. Now, just one closing thing, and then I'll open it up to questions. A Christian friend of mine once asked me what irritated me most about religion. I thought that was a great thing to ask. And I thought about it for a while. And I've actually answered this question in different ways at different times in my life. But at that point, I said something that I still think is one of the things that bothers me most. It's the incuriosity in religion. It's the fact that it allows people to not really be so curious that you'll burrow through things that make you feel good, that you'll burrow through the magic corn, right? When somebody gives you that answer and say, wait a minute, magic corn, and continue burrowing because you're so hungry to know what's real. I said, that's the thing that really gets me. The universe is an astonishing, thrilling place to be, right? No matter what. If there's a God, it's amazing. If there's no God, it's amazing. I don't have to worry about it. I just want to know which it is, right? So I want my kids to have that hunger. And I want them to pursue a worldview as a free thinker with a lowercase f. I want them to pursue it so that they're going to end up owning it. And if religious ideas illuminate reality, they will accept those ideas. But if instead they seem to obscure reality, as I think they do, they're just going to bat the damn things aside because that's the way, that's the hunger that they've had all the way along the way. They are going to own their worldview. They're going to be actual free thinkers no matter what their eventual conclusions are. Okay, thanks very much, and I'll take questions.
Thank you. I'm a single parent. I've got a daughter that I've raised since she was 3. Mm-hmm. And I did the similar situation with the Santa Claus issue.
Yeah.
But there's critical thinking is something that I pressed very hard because, you know, other people's kids got wise to Santa Claus, but they still believe in Jesus and God. And if they don't believe in that, they believe in witchcraft and,
right.
and the eyeballs. So how did you address the critical thinking? Encourage that? Because it's not really encouraged too much in public schools.
You know, that's true. Well, one of the things that frustrates me, my wife is a public school teacher, and one of the things that frustrates both of us is that critical thinking is woven into the curricula of just about every public school district in the United States. It just doesn't find its way into the classroom, but it's there in lip service. This whole thing ended up being a critical thinking exercise. One of the things that I think we need to be comfortable with is allowing our kids to think uncritically along the way. You know, allowing him to accept a ridiculous answer like that, like the magic corn, and run off and play. And I'm just going to say, all right, you know, at some point he's going to come back because he's got that hunger, because and we valued critical thinking from the beginning, and we've talked about critical thinking since they were, you know, as early as they could possibly think about the concept. But we always talked about it as a tool for actually understanding what in the world is going on. So in this case, it was just a matter of letting it play out and letting finally that hunger overwhelm his desire to believe. And it did. And once he did, the satisfaction of it, the tremendous, anybody who's had a child, you know, kind of express that beaming satisfaction when they figure something out like that, knows what I'm talking about. But I think it's a willingness to let them be uncritical along the way, and then let their hunger kick in. You know, I don't want the correction to always come from me. This is what it amounts to. If you're constantly correcting them, well, now wait a minute, think about that. Oh yeah, you want to do that, but with a very, very light touch. You want them to drive it. You want it to come from them, and that's when they're going to really own it.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm curious for my own future parenting, note-taking, how you would have responded had you received the question from your daughter of "it feels good when I rub it,"
Yeah.
In the context you had anticipated, how would you have answered that?
Oh, you know what? There's a talk coming up that's going to be. But how would I answer it? Actually, I did in one form or another. That has come up with my kids, and I think it's very important to anticipate it so that you do treat it the way it deserves to be treated, which is as an absolutely natural human thing, you know, that it's not necessarily something that you do, you know, on the school bus. You know, that it's something private, but that there's nothing in the world wrong with it, and that our bodies are actually evolved for that to feel good. You know, you tie it into, you know, it's amazing what you end up tying into biological evolution once you really understand evolution in depth. That there's a reason that feels good. And one of the things we've talked about ethically all the time is, you know, the harm principle. If someone is harmed by something, it's, you know, that might be a bad thing. But if no one is harmed by it, and no one's harmed by that, then have a ball, you know? I mean, that's, and it's just amazing how simple and obvious that is once you get kind of our acculturation out of the way. But I think you really have to anticipate it as a parent so that you can be, you know, very natural. And not introduce anything into their heads that it's something to be ashamed of or something wrong.
Okay, I have a 9 and 11-year-old, and I've basically been doing it the same way you've done it, with the one exception of my children have no idea what I believe, because I felt like that was an undue influence.
Right.
I kind of had the plan along the way that when they ask, I'll tell them.
Right.
But I kind of figured it would take a while for them to get there. My problem is we're 9 and 11 now and still believe in Santa, probably just lying to me so that they still get gifts. My concern is I have one that's very much a follower.
Yeah.
And he talks about it a lot and asks to go to church a lot and asks to wear crosses a lot. And we talked about the really close people in my life who are atheists and that sort of thing. My concern is, what happens if he goes that way?
Yeah.
Can I start influencing him at some point? I mean,
Yes.
how do you deal with that?
I think he needs to know what you believe. I think as early as possible, and it's never too late, but I think in very natural ways, let them know what you believe. Let them know everything that you believe. I don't shield my kids from my negative opinions of religion. I also counterbalance it with the positive aspects, you know, so I try to be as balanced as possible in that. But here's the way you deal with the undue influence. You realize that you are influencing, not indoctrinating, okay? The difference is this: indoctrination is very specifically defined. It's teaching that demands acceptance. If you teach someone and you don't give them an option of rejecting it or questioning it, that's indoctrination. Now, indoctrination is not actually always bad. When you go to medical school and you learn how to do heart surgery, you should be indoctrinated into that initially, right? So you learn what we know about that, and you accept it, and you spit it back on the test, and then maybe later in your career you'll start to have insights that people didn't have or whatever, but in the beginning you have to be indoctrinated into it. That's appropriate. A worldview that's not appropriate. You know, that's not, partially because these are things that, for which we don't have evidence. You know, this is something that is a matter of opinion based on our observations and so on. And then I come to a very strong opinion, but it wouldn't be appropriate to say, this is settled, this is something we know. That's when you start to get into indoctrination. You will have undue influence as the parent. You absolutely will. But if you open the door after every statement, at least for a while, I did this and then my kids finally just told me to shut up. But what happens is my daughter came to me and said, example I gave, did Jesus really rise from the dead? You know, she heard that story. Did Jesus really rise from the dead? And I said, I don't think he did. I think that was a story that's made up to make us feel better about death. But you know, I know that Grandma Barbara does believe it. You should set up a time to go talk to her and see what she believes, and then you get to make up your mind on your own and change your mind 1,000 times if you want. That speech and those words is what my kids heard so often growing up. here's what I believe. You really should, find somebody who believes differently and talk to them, and then you get to make up your own mind and change your mind 1,000 times if you want. They finally started saying, I know, okay, fine, I know, I'd start into the speech, but you really mean to make up your own mind. And that's when I knew the message had gotten in. So I really think you need to let him know that, because otherwise he will assume that you're part of the religious default. That's what kids are going to assume, and it's not true. So when he finds out that there are loved ones in his family who do believe, and there are others who don't believe, all of a sudden it becomes his choice, and that's what we want. That's a powerful thing.
This question may become redundant, I guess, since we've been asking it so much, but what advice do you have for those of us with young family members, nieces, nephews, cousins, who have already been indoctrinated, or will soon be? How do you propose to have this discussion as a family or with family members without being divisive?
Yeah. So you've got nieces and nephews, other branches of the family who have been indoctrinated into religion, and you would like to give them the, I'll answer it in this way. What you want to do is give them your example. It is really the fullest extent that you need to do. There is nothing in the world wrong with you being who you are and saying who you are. It's ideal if it comes up in context, where they actually ask a question like that. But that, in many cases, is still going to rub your brother, sister, brother-in-law, whatever, the wrong way. But that's an entirely defensible thing. And at that point, that child has another intelligent loved one in their extended family who has a different point of view. It's amazing how powerful that is. Most kids grow up thinking that everyone around them believes exactly the same thing. If they can have one person in their family who is a decent person, a loved one, who has a different worldview, you've broken the ability to indoctrinate that child as effectively. So be that person in any way that you can in your family. Simply be out and normal, right? I mean, that's really what it takes. You're a lovely person and you're out, you have this other worldview. That's a tremendously powerful thing for a kid to see. That's what indoctrination tries to avoid, right? You got to get all other voices out of the way so that they don't see any other possibilities. You want to break through that in the gentlest way you possibly can by simply being out to your family.
I have a question. I know you kind of touched on it a little bit with the story of Jesus coming back to life and everything like that. I'm about to be a first-time mom, so I'm really curious about how to approach a bunch of things. But one thing that has really gotten me curious is how do I explain death and what happens afterwards? I mean, obviously nobody knows for sure, unless somebody's died and come back to life. But obviously that doesn't happen. But what's the best approach or the best advice that you have for how to approach that?
Yeah, this is the big one. I mean, there's no denying that this is the most challenging thing about being human. It's not just a challenge for atheists. This is the first thing that we've got to say. This is a challenge for being human. The least fair thing about our existence is that we die. That's bullshit, I mean, to be a conscious being and to be evolved to fear the end of your life and then to know that it's coming anyway is just wrong. And so I can completely understand how religions have grown up to simply say, that's not okay, that's not all right with me. So, but the thing to realize is that religious people struggle with death every bit as much as we do. Why do we pretend that religion cures the fear of death? It really doesn't. When people go to funerals, religious funerals, they cry. When they find out that somebody has a terminal illness, they cry. They pray like mad. They don't want this person to die. They are also afraid of death. What we have to do is we don't have some of the wallpaper that they've got, but we're actually in a position to address it not only more honestly, but I think in a way that's more profound. my youngest, Delaney, hit this when she was 6, when she was really suddenly thinking about death and talking about it and really scared. One of the things I said is, well, some people believe you go to heaven. So I did the same thing we did with Santa. Some people believe you go to heaven. And she was already at a point then where she goes, what else you got? Pretty much. But I wanted to leave that open. You might choose something different from me. And I said, well, sometimes I think about death and I'm scared. And when I do that, I realize I'm not thinking of it in exactly the right way. Because this is the wonderful Epicurean thing. I said, how scared were you 100 years ago? And she said, what do you mean 100 years ago? I wasn't anywhere 100 years ago. And then she went, and she put it together right away. She said, it's the same, right? And this is the Epicurean, or the Lucretian symmetry, that's what it is. We didn't exist for, billions of years before our birth, and we won't exist for billions of years after our death. There is no difference between those two things. There's literally no difference except our ability to anticipate the next one, which is, that's a difference. Meditating on that idea and talking to my kids about it has done more to cure me and them, I think, of the fear of death than anything. That is the most powerful idea we've got, that one. The fact that we've already been there, right, in a very real way. And really understanding what non-existence means. That it's not me floating in darkness forever, which is what I thought of death as when I was a kid, me floating in darkness. That's not what it is. When you really understand that it's where you were before you were born, that's a very, very powerful idea. So that's my main recommendation. The other one I do that I'll talk about in the workshop, if anybody's coming to that tomorrow, is we talk a tremendous amount about how lucky we are to be here at all. And the Richard Dawkins passage from Unweaving the Rainbow is one of the best things that anybody has ever written, in which he says, it starts with, we're going to die and that makes us the lucky ones. And he talks about the statistical unlikelihood that you would ever have been born, that there are basically quadrillions of people standing behind you right now who are possible combinations of DNA but never were born, and instead you are here in their place. You should not be here statistically, right? You won the biggest lottery in the universe by being here at all. And when I look at my life and say I only get to live for 8 or 9 decades and start to whine about that, I imagine these 4 quadrillion people behind me going, oh, come on, So we talk a lot about how lucky they are to be here and all the things that almost got in the way of them being born. This is something my kids adore. We tell stories about things that actually almost delayed my wife's first pregnancy or whatever it is, and they always get these eyes like they just got hit by a train and they realize that they were almost not born. We were all almost not born in 1,000 different ways. Those are the things that can flip the whole question on its head. And you can actually, instead of thinking about death in quite the same way, you are just being amazed that you're here at all. That's a very different approach.
Yeah.
Others?
Teacher influence and school curriculum influence. What is your opinion on that and how do you tackle that?
Religion in schools?
Teachers.
Yeah, teachers. You got any of that here? Is that a thing? Now, I live in Metro Atlanta, the Metro Atlanta area. It's in the South, but it's not in the South. It's called the Yankee City of the South. And we still have problems with this, that'll come up once in a while, even in a relatively diverse area. This is another thing I talk about at length in the workshop, but one of the two main things you do when you approach a school, you've got a problem, teacher is giving extra credit points for memorizing Bible verses. This is one of the things I've heard. Or having kids lay hands on another child who failed a test. Okay, everybody come around here, lay hands on them, Jesus is going to help them do better on the next test. You're going to be kidding. That's actually wrong. But the way you approach it can take all the attention off the thing that was done that was wrong. What you want to do is approach it in a way that keeps a laser focus on that thing. There are two things you want to do. One of them is to make it as broad as possible, an issue. This is not an atheist issue. If you go into it and say, I'm an atheist and I'm offended because they're praying in the classroom, you've drawn this tiny little circle around your feet, and you're not going to get a lot of attention. But if you go in and say, you know what, very calmly, because you don't want your tone to become the issue, right? You go in and say, there are Jewish students in the school, there are Muslim students in the school, there are people from all different, and I am an atheist. There's a constitutional guarantee that we're not going to have a single religion placed in the classroom. Now, the person who's going to listen to you most often is the school administrator. There's a very, very good, it's not always the case, but school administrators are extremely smart and well-trained people. And one of the things they've been trained in is how to avoid lawsuits. It's true. So a teacher will often not have had that training, and they don't know what they're stepping in. And you take it to the principal, and the eyes go like that, and they know immediately what's going on. If they don't, you go up the ladder, one step at a time. And I guarantee at some point, you're going to hit somebody who's had some training. And even if they're not doing it for the right reason, even if they're not, saying, oh, that's not right, we shouldn't put children in that situation, even if they're thinking, that's going to cost the district a lot of money, whatever, somebody will get it, and somebody will be on your side in that. The other thing that you always want to do relates to that, which is know that you have allies in the school. And if you go in with a flamethrower, if you go in and just say, this school is ridiculous, and you go to the media and you go over everybody's head and all that sort of thing, there are a whole bunch of people who would have been on your side, and they now have to circle the wagons around the school. That's what happens. Instead, you have to know, when I had an issue with Delaney in her elementary school, and I went into the principal, he was fantastic. He was phenomenal. He recognized the problem right away. He fixed the problem. He reported to me afterwards. He said, I don't want to see this happen again. Well, 2 years later, he moved on to another school, and he sent me an email and said, by the way, I'm a humanist. I'm a secular humanist. And I couldn't say anything during that time, but I was entirely on board with what you were saying. So that's, you have allies in there, whether they're humanists or not. You have allies in those situations, and you don't want to alienate them with your approach. Okay. Our microphone. Are we done? Okay. Thank you very much.